Pictures. Just kidding.
This is for both speakers. How do you build trust while also allowing people to feel they can be whistleblowers if something bad is going on and everybody on the team is doing something bad, whether it's, I don't want to give examples, but they're all doing something bad, but somebody wants to be a whistleblower as far as like maybe data leakage or something, but still have trust on that team.
So, thanks. I started with, I said assume positive intent earlier. It almost made it to its own slide. Because assuming positive intent is a great place to start. Just remembering that most people are well-intentioned and mean to be doing the right things. It's a very small percentage of people who are. So you can start there. And then you can do practices that reinforce the fact that, hey, we're assuming positive intent. Does anybody know what a blameless debrief is or a blameless post-mortem? Yeah. John Allspaw, I'll reference, has done some really fantastic work around this and continues to. He was at Flickr and Etsy and now doing his own thing. But anyway, it's a format for doing a root cause analysis when something goes wrong. He was a sort of operations leader, and as you know, DevOps and SREs are right at the center when things go wrong with your software project. Well, what you want to do is make sure that when something breaks, you get to the root causes. The way to get to the root causes is to make sure everybody feels safe talking about what actually happened and not doing any CYA stuff in the post-mortem, because otherwise the bad things, the root cause will happen again. So it's practice, and you say at the beginning of each blameless debrief, we're not here to place blame, we're here to learn why the person that was sitting in front of the giant red button that said don't press me actually pressed it, assuming that their context was such that it seemed like the right thing to do. And if we had been in their seat, we would have done the exact same thing. That's the starting point. So that's how I do it. And then that's just one way to practice and foster that throughout the organization. Because you can do that blameless debrief process for anything that goes wrong, from the operations team through every part.
Yeah, so maybe just two thoughts to build on that, because I totally agree with what you just said. First, every high-performing team or person I've ever seen does two things consistently. They say what they're going to do, and they review if they actually did it. All right? And so if you think about that at what he was just talking about post-mortem, if you establish a culture where you're going to walk into a room after every single thing you do, you're going to take off all rank, title, position, leave it at the door, and have an honest dialogue by the numbers of what happened, what didn't happen, then you're going to just fundamentally change the conversation. So things like whistleblowing doesn't have to happen. Because at that point, it's just the nature of it. We're going to review methodically, very candidly, what's going on. The best teams, it's really easy to tear apart a failure, right? When someone pushes the wrong button, everybody knows something went wrong, and so usually people get in the room and they figure it out. I actually think what differentiates high-performing teams is they tear apart their successes. Because oftentimes, why you succeed isn't the reason why you thought you succeed. There's probably something that could have gone differently if a different thing happened. And so if you make this your constant routine, you're doing this after every single thing you do, it's almost like your sprint reviews, then you're going to get better. And there's going to be this culture where people feel comfortable sharing and expressing and talking around failures and successes equally. So there isn't that issue. That's one thing. The second thing is, as managers in this room, in the military there's an old tactic called troop in the line. Have you ever heard of troop in the line? What that means? Well, there's one guy who served us up. So troop in the line was, in the old days, you used to go out, and walk basically your outer perimeter. And what would happen is a senior leader would go out and walk, and they'd sit in the foxhole with other people. Right, and they'd sit there and have conversations and basically try to sit in their shoes and understand. So if you have a culture as a manager of getting engaged, fundamentally what your people are doing, getting out of your desk and in your comfort zone, going spending a little bit of time in these groups, you'll establish that safety where people feel like they can have conversations and connect with you. Right, so I would highly encourage you to be sort of active managers and get out and interact and touch your people on a frequent basis.
Okay. Question over here. Sorry. Can both of you share a couple of stories about moments of trust? One where it really exceeded expectations, and two where it didn't meet expectations.
Okay, well, I'm trying to think of specific, but I just want to assure everybody, I've totally failed at trusting my teams before, and it's a terrible thing to have to live with, except that they're really good lessons to take home and to do my own introspection and iterate on. but I'm trying to think of a specific example. There are just so many. I just can't think of one that's like super interesting, because they're just like, people have their feelings hurt, and I guess I'll talk about the recovery for when that happens, because I'm not perfect by any stretch, and so when it happens now, I'm the first person to call attention to that trust failure, and the recipe for an apology that Dave had is just spot on, and you really just have to do that. And you know, it's interesting. As you were showing that slide, I was just like, you know, we're talking about really precisely the same concepts, and the approaches are just coming from different, really different experience, but it's all the same stuff. It's just really amazing. So anyway, and then exceeding expectations, I think, yeah, when I was at InView, you know, I reference Lean Startup frequently because InView is known as the first Lean Startup. We had a small team of people who did really amazing things. First, the team was kind of a rogue team working undercover because they were trying to get out from the weight of the organization. What they did was they reinvented the entire user interface for a very, very complex product. And they did it first undercover, and then because we enabled it by trusting them to make sure the right things happened. It was just totally brilliant. It was an impossible kind of project. And they did a tight timeline. I mean, it was amazing.
Most of my stories are inappropriate, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Come on, take a risk.
No, that was good.
Come on.
Yeah, so I found special. So when I was in probably my fifth deployment, I was in Baghdad, and I had the responsibility of running a combined unit of SEALs, Army Special Operations, Air Force Special Operations, and then more importantly, the Iraqi counterterrorism force. So their premier sort of Delta Force, we sort of trained, developed, and our responsibility is to sort of work with them, help them sort of take back control of their own country. So we were prosecuting the highest level targets. One of our challenges, we had a small recce team that would basically try to go out in advance and collect intelligence for us, especially if we were going to go to an objective, so they would understand what we were getting ourselves into. And so these guys were taking the most risk. They're driving around civilian clothes, they're out operating the populace, oftentimes way behind enemy lines, doing stuff that they were compromised, would result in them being killed and probably their families being killed. In fact, that happened a couple of times. So as we tried to figure out how to resource them, I didn't have a lot of excess funds to give them money to do stuff. So one of my more resourceful officers, unbeknownst to me, had all of a sudden had some significant uptick in productivity around getting out and finding stuff and accessing it. So I finally went to check on these guys and said, well, what are you guys doing differently? And turns out they had been very resourceful in how they were getting funds. Meaning they were, as we were going on to objectives where there were known bad people, and after we cleared that objective, we would take stuff off the objective, usually for intelligence purposes to aggregate. Well, in that process, they would also take off, like, let's say, a vehicle. And then they would go and sell that vehicle on a black market, take that money, and then leverage that to basically put back into the workforce to drive this intelligence. And so this very entrepreneurial spirit, borderline illegal, had sort of created opportunity for one area that we didn't have. So we had to figure out how to like get that all sort of approved and above line. But I was sort of amazed that given a little bit of rope, this person was out there making progress happen. Otherwise, they never could. So my experience is when you put someone closest to a problem, they're typically the best person to solve that problem. If you trust and let them kind of do the thing. And if you don't feel that way, it's because of what? Why would you not trust somebody who's dealing directly with the opportunity problem? Why would you not do it? What do you think? What's the reason why you wouldn't trust them?
Maybe they are too attached.
Say that again?
Too attached to the problem. Or
They're too detached from the problem? Is that what you said? Okay.
And how like
Their risk of, so the risk of failure, so my experience is in this case, the person is close to the problem, so they're very detached to it. But maybe the risk at the high level, like, oh, I don't want to delegate that because the impacts are too high. Well, like I said earlier, I think that's kind of everything these days. But what else?
Past experiences.
Say it again?
Past experiences. If they
Past experience? They lack experience, maybe? They don't. So that's the whole point of what we're talking about, which was, yes, that's exactly why you do it, right? You pull it up because you say, well, you lack the context or experience of what we should do here. Or the risk is so high, I need to pull that up to my level. Well, at some point that becomes antiquated because as a leader, you find very quickly that you're not adding a lot of value to that problem set. right? So we used to wake up this general every time we wanted to drop a bomb, right? And we would basically tell him what we thought made sense. And he'd be like, well, okay, I only know what you just told me, so what do you want me to do, right? And you're like, so the point is, if you put out intent and let people understand, you set up those guardrails, you put transparency in place so there's real accountability so people will know that they're being watched, good things are going to happen. People are going to iterate the stuff. And if they don't lack the experience and context, find a way to pump that information to them continuously. Right? Over-communicate on, hey, this is the intent, these are the learnings, and then you're going to see this massive uptick in productivity. For us, it was substantial. Right? We went from doing very few operations to doing a lot very, very quickly because we were empowered at the local level to make decisions in our area, and we had the conscious understanding from, in our case, the leader on what it is we expected to do and what the ramifications were. And so, you know, most people will do the right thing, as James just said, you know, given the opportunity. So your job as a leader is to kind of push that down as much as you can. You should be empowering people to the point where it really hurts. And I would challenge if you go back and look at your personal schedule and figure out what you're doing, I would look hard at your calendar and say, what could I stop doing that I can give to somebody else? And what are the things that only I can do that I need to do? Be really brutally honest about that and try to delegate everything else, and you'll get a significant uptick in productivity quickly.
So, as someone who's not a manager, I would love to hear some of the advice that you give your younger self when you were, becoming a leader or a manager. It's interesting to hear.
So much. No, I think to lead you got to follow. Right? You got to learn how to be a servant because ultimately leading is being a servant leader is I think the fundamental case. And so you got to figure out what a Master Chief once told me back in the Navy is the role of the leader is to serve their people, and the role of the people is to basically perform to the highest possible standard for their boss, right? And so if you're looking at yourself, I would just be really good at what you do. Focus on the things that you do and just crush it every single day. If you do that, you're going to set yourself up for lots of opportunities later. You're going to gain a lot of confidence and trust without your teammates and also with your boss. And you're going to see more responsibility and oversight sort of coming your way. So I'll just really hammer the things. Be good at what you do. That would be the big thing I'd say. And be patient. Be patient. Ultimately, it's not about you. It's all about how you're basically trying to figure out how to help other people. Once you get in that managerial experience, in order to do that, you got to understand what it feels like to be in that role.
I just want to echo everything Dave just said and just call out, like, some people have a natural tendency to want to be a servant. And I was just telling somebody the other day, like, if I wasn't doing this job that I have now, I'd probably be running a restaurant or something, so I could serve as many people as possible and have people like leave 60 or 100 people a night just like, I feel so happy. But if you don't have that personality, I think focusing on and learning from people that do have that, and just see how they do it. And I think part of what you can take away from some of what we said are there are actually some practices that you can do to try it out. You can try out ways to delegate and ways to trust, and even ways to even talk about trying to do this with people that'll sort of help commit you and help people hold you accountable for doing things that are like what leaders do. So, go ahead.
Question over here. Cool. Are there any core tenets of leadership or observations you had early in your career that you've done a complete reversal on?
Probably. I'm just thinking, like, my brain right now is going through all the mistakes, just all of them. And I don't know. It's practice. To give yourself a break. And I'm just thinking about what I would do differently. I think I would approach things in the style of, how fast can I learn, and how gentle can I be with myself as I try to learn new things. Enlist the help of people around me, ask for help, be vulnerable, let people know what it is you're trying to do, and along those lines.
Yeah, I would say what James sort of led off of in his last talk was probably my biggest sort of 180. When I went to the Naval Academy, where they profess they teach leadership to young men that come in and women that come in there. In the military, they always trying to harvest that out of you as you progress up. And I think my image of a leader was a commanding figure who was stoic, calm under pressure, and always sort of like a level of resolve. And so what that sort of implied was you kind of shoulder most of the burden yourself, and you're not very vulnerable, on how you're feeling or what you're feeling, because that certainly creates anxiety, and anxiety that turns into like the troops losing confidence in you and so on and so forth. And what I found to be very different once you actually got into areas where that was stressed was that being vulnerable was the absolute right instinct to do. Like actually sharing and saying, hey, I don't know. That actually built trust with the team, and the team said, all right, collectively we're going to have to figure it out, right? And so it actually really bonded us more effectively than trying to hold back. I mean, the other sort of fallacy is you think your team or your people underneath you don't know what's going on. They always do, right? And to the extent that there is uncertainty, that creates usually really, really, really bad outcomes, right? Because their minds, especially smart people, start going wild. And so you're better off just by sharing and being transparent and being very vulnerable and honest, and you'll usually get a much better response.
What do you do if there's a member of your team who has good skills and good intentions, like they want to do the right thing, but their instincts are wrong? Like the first thing they jump to is maybe slightly illegal or accesses to so they perform well on a short leash, essentially, but given more trust and more of a leash, they end up not doing the correct thing.
I think, it's just, first of all, recognizing that the person is like that and that their instincts might be, as you say, wrong. I think you have to notice that and then have a candid conversation about that with them, because it's going to reset their expectation about what they might be able to do with you and as on a role with the team. And just you got to be honest with where they're at. Just talk about it, and then figure out what the next best thing is. It's one of the hardest things about being a manager is like noticing that, and then noticing that with the person, and then figuring out a safe way to develop that person to take advantage of the strengths that they do have. So that's it.
Yeah, so being a leader in the SEALs was a lot like kind of being a captain of a pirate ship, where you're sort of first among equals, and you kind of got this really mixed bag of talent. And I think there's this fallacy that everybody's sort of like, probably better than they actually really are. And I think it's really important to do what James just said. You got to understand your people and what their strengths and weaknesses are and what their propensities are. And so my biggest risk as a leader was SEALs being bored. If they were bored, they were likely going to do really stupid things. and the result was going to involve my career. So my job was kind of keep them busy. And oftentimes I wanted to understand where they had a propensity to maybe kind of go off the rails. And so, I don't know, it was probably my third or fourth platoon, but I said, all right, I got to understand, in this case, these were all guys, how they show up when they're drinking, because in Italy, alcohol was part of the culture back then. So I take them on, I pick one night where I thought there was a relatively controlled environment. I'm like, all right, we're going to get everybody liquored up and see what happens. And see who my fighters are, who my sleepers, who my talkers. And that way you understand where their propensities are. And that's sort of a gross, old school analogy, but I would say you have to figure out something similar for your people. You got to understand what are their instincts on certain situations. You got to put mechanisms and controls around that so that you're creating awareness. Because really what you're talking about is person's lacks awareness. Right? They don't understand even how they're showing up and approaching certain situations and how that can affect other people. And you want to try to create that through feedback and mechanisms and controls that are around them. I caveat that all with, there's a line though, right? If someone's doing something legally, morally, ethically wrong, there's really no tolerance for that, right? So I include those as things that are what I call virtues. It's almost like oxygen. If they lack those things, they demonstrate effectively sociopathic behavior, then you just gotta get them out of your organization, right? That's not going to improve. But if they have well intentions and they just naturally maybe move in a direction, you just got to create an awareness around that mechanism to help them mature.
As your organization sizes grew, your scope of responsibility, how did that, as your organization size grew, your scope of responsibility, how did that affect your challenges and strategies for facilitating trust within your organizations?
I think specifically, trying to think specifically for trust, I'll start with, you just have to get, first of all, really good at just delegating and managing. Having a manager that manages people is a totally different thing than managing people. And then when you have a director managing managers, managing people, it's another thing entirely. And for me, it causes a focus on how can I reframe and how can I clarify again and again and again so that everyone has that shared consciousness, and then I can just trust them to do the right thing. And I think for me, when I got to the managing a director, managed managers, that's when things got really challenging for me personally. Because I just, it wasn't that I didn't understand the concept of how it was going to work, but there was something that I was feeling really anxious about how the director was going to be doing what I thought was so hard, which is setting that clear direction. And so it just, then I realized, like, it's moments like that where I actually wanted to say, like, can't I just, like, tell the person what to do? You know, can't I just go and let someone else worry about this? But it's those moments where you have to realize, like, okay, gird yourself. You have to work even harder to do the things that a leader needs to do. It's like you might be the only person in the room that is able that day to do it. And so,
yeah, I'd say two big things. When you're small and you're managing, leading, you can more or less muscle through anything, right? With hard work and energy and drive, you can sort of figure it out, right? As long as you're committed to all the principles you heard that James talked about earlier, you'll be fine. When you get to a certain scale, though, you can't just will it to happen anymore. You got to have process. You got to put processes in place that consistently produce results. You don't do that, you're going to create tremendous inefficiencies in your enterprise, right? And so people hate the word process, but to me, process is what created flexibility, right? Because what you're doing effectively is lowering the cognitive load on the organization so it has capacity to do other things when necessary. So you got to be ruthless around your individual process as a leader because you're going to affect people disproportionately, given your role and responsibility. And two, you have to have something that synchronizes the organization continuously so it creates predictability, right? So I think that's the difference between small and big, right? That's why startups sort of struggle to get to a certain scale and size. About 125 people, the muscle doesn't really work anymore. You got to put systems in place that allow it to go past that level.
I'm curious on that point, do you have a couple examples of some processes you put in place to build trust when you're dealing with a couple hundred people?
Yeah, the way I approach this, we call it like an operating rhythm. So every single person in this room has a rhythm, right? If I followed you around for a week, I'd map out what you do. I'd say this is more or less 80% we do continuously. Your organization is the same thing. It does certain ways on how it communicates and makes decisions. You should be very conscious of how that's happening and basically document it. And then you should look for inefficiencies and you can reverse it. I always find it like sort of mind-boggling to me now, looking at when I came out of the military and came into working with a lot of large global organizations. There is no like chief collaboration officer, yet it's where your most expensive and valuable resources are people. And the thing they spend the most time doing is spending time in meetings and having discussions around things. And there's no one basically constantly curating and managing that process and make sure, is that producing the outcomes we want? Is it efficient use of the time and the rest of it? So I just think you have to be very deliberate around what we call building an operating rhythm. So if you think about, we got to do something strategically, we got to do something operationally, tactically, what are the things we need to do to enable that? And then try to reduce everything out and put a lot of discipline and standards around those things to make sure it's producing the right outcomes you want. And just curing that constantly, right? So, I mean, you almost do a sprint review on that quarterly and say, did that work? How did we spend our time? Did I produce results we want? How can we spend our time differently? If we stop doing these things, would it make a difference or not? I mean, I would just be ruthless about it. It's your most valuable resource is the people in this room. Right, and how they're using their time should be, what you guys care about the most. It's going to unlock the biggest productivity.
Yeah, I want to double down on what Dave said. And the way I was thinking about the examples are in product development, we've got usually a product leader, or sometimes it's the CEO, whoever the visionary is for building the product. We've got to make sure that that vision continues to be communicated as the team grows. And you've got various leaders. You've got product leaders, and you've got technical leaders. You've got design leaders. And what I like to do is, as a process point, is make sure that those leaders have their own meetings, call it a tech lead meeting, a product lead meeting, a design lead meeting. It's another forum for them to share information, digest the information, and help each other. And it's a place where they can also exert some of the decision-making power that you have delegated. As like Dave said, I'm presenting something that I've used in the past as sort of a process point, like a specific process point, but used with caution, your mileage may vary depending on your own context, and it really makes sense to constantly check in. We do basically everything is a process experiment when we introduce a mechanism or a process to make things work better, and we constantly check in and just make sure it's still working because the business keeps changing, everything's changing, you've got to check in, otherwise you get into a dysfunctional routine believing that everything's fine. So there's like this real, just to touch on the self-awareness thing too, I almost really wanted to earlier, so I got to say it. Self-awareness, totally crucial. Self-awareness in your organization, that ability for teams to introspect, not just individuals, is super, super critical. So you can keep yourself from, driving a team into a wall.
Just going to take maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up and for the middle games. I think James and David will just stay for a little bit more.
Quick question. So we've talked a lot about, as a manager, building trust with your team. What if you reverse that and you have a director or VP who's having trouble trusting the folks under them? Is there a way to try and help them develop the trust that they need for their team that's below?
It's the team below. Okay, so it's like
we're kind of flipping that problem, right? So you're on a team where your leader's having trouble trusting his team, right? Is there a way that, as a team member, so I'm a manager of a group, but I also have leaders above me, so I'm wondering how I can help those leaders trust the group of managers that report to that leader.
Okay, that last way you frame that that makes it way more interesting to me. That's a really interesting, challenging issue. I want to ask more questions about like how does trust feel now week? How does communication flow? And kind of what are some of the other particular symptoms? But generally, I think if you're in a position to broach conversations in a safe way to the people that you are being supported by, I think you have to do it, and you have to sort of be courageous and just say, hey, we sense that there's a lack of trust here, and we would like to fix it. Express all positive intent in every way that makes you feel safe and them feel safe. Because I don't know, it sounds like it could be a loaded thing, although it could just be also me with a worst case scenario in mind.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but I'll answer the way I think I understood it. How about that? I think, so first of all, I think you got to try to figure out how to get that mid-level manager group, to the extent that their boss doesn't trust them and his peers, or their peers, to increase the number of engagements, right? So I say lean in, right? I say, if your boss isn't trusting you, find more touch points that create more transparency and use that leads to good outcomes. And the second thing is, you try to get them to reframe the conversation, I think what was said so earlier, to be one of accountability. Like, hey, I just come in by saying, understanding their position, the leader's anxiety point, and saying, acknowledging and validating that. And then from there, then talking about what we're going to do about it next. And I find that to be very disarming, all of a sudden he starts to build confidence in it. Right? You want to demonstrate confidence at your level first, and you do that through lots of touch points, and then you have to acknowledge and validate whatever their anxiety was, so they feel like, okay, you now understand, and that's my issue above me.
All right, one last question.
I already asked one, so
You mentioned something sort of interesting about almost preparing someone for transitioning to a different company. If you've got a really well-functioning team with high levels of trust, then letting someone go can actually erode trust on the rest of the team, not just for that one person, but actually everybody else who may have a sense of family, for example. Is that something you guys have dealt with?
Definitely. And I think when you have open communication and the team understands like this, there's a person that has just reached a point where there's nothing left for them at the company, and they have more things that they want to do with their career. And if there's open communication about that, and I think there ought to be, then the team understands. And you have to just sit with and be okay and comfortable with dealing with it's like the grief and loss of a family member. I mean, it really does feel that way. And that's okay. It's hard. And I think recognizing it and then talking about it and giving people kind of helping with tools to talk together about it and sort of process it is the way that I've done it, like literally.
So this is where I think our experiences are pretty common, actually. So technology, Navy SEALs, and I live in DC, right? The one common number is people moving around a lot, right? So people move pretty quickly in the technology space, recovery in the company. In the military, it's sort of implied every 2-3 years you're going to transition out of a unit, go somewhere else. And in government in DC, there's just a constant influx of people coming in and out. And if you look at their resumes, it's like this massive list of like every place they've been, and sort of accepted. So I think the common thing, one is, as a manager, if you're really a servant leader, your job is to make sure that person, whenever they're leaving and going wherever they're going next, is set up as good as possible for success, right? And you want to invest in that because you never know, it's like karma, when that's going to come back around, right? Because it's a long life, is what I've been told several times by people who tell me no. And you know, things tend to have a way of kind of working back around on themselves. And so I would argue it's almost as important, it's probably even more important how you leave an organization. That includes the manager's responsibility in facilitating somebody else's departure, as it is how they show up. Because it sort of sets the conditions, sets the framework. So I just offer that as sort of advice. But I wouldn't look at it as I lost my team, whatever else. I see it as an opportunity to build and reinvent the team and make it even stronger, potentially, right? We used to cheer when people would quit SEAL training, like, we got stronger. But I think the same thing applies. So you should look at it as a challenge and opportunity, basically kind of reformat the team. Maybe it's just empower somebody otherwise is waiting for some movement up or some responsibility, someone maybe younger, less experienced, that can obviously have a leadership role and responsibility in the group. That's a great opportunity for you as a manager. And then two, if you set that up to go somewhere else, it's going to come. It'll pay it back. It'll pay it back. I promise. So I think we're done. So thank you guys. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks.